Mindset AI presents The Lady of Castaure, a forbidden elven love, a defaced grave, and the spirit that would not fade. Michael Payne, my sworn companion, and I were chroniclers in service to the Crown of Avalorn, tasked with gathering accounts of ancient legends for the royal archives. Our commission concerned itself with old tales, those whispered in hearthlight, half forgotten by scholars, yet stubbornly alive in the memories of the land. Spirits, vanished peoples, and the lingering scars of magic were our particular province. Our custom was always the same. When a tale reached us, we sought out its keeper. One autumn evening, a message arrived borne by a tired courier from the high moorlands of Derwyn Vale. The letter was written in a careful, wavering hand by an elderly farmer who claimed that his land was haunted, not by malice, but by sorrow. He believed the truth behind the apparition had been buried for centuries, and he wished it known before his own time ran out. Intrigued, we set out at once. Derwyn Vale lay in the northern marches of the realm, a place of rolling highlands and sheer stone escarpments, where the bones of the world lay close to the surface. Vast tracts of the land had never been claimed by plow or city, and there were places where the forests still grew as they had in elder ages, untouched since before the rise of men. The road to the village of Castaure meandered through narrow passes and green valleys. Sheep grazed freely along the verges, untroubled by travelers, and yawning caverns opened in the pale limestone cliffs, many of them feared, some revered. Most famous among them was Elden Hollow, a cavern long protected by royal decree, for relics of forgotten peoples had been unearthed there, relics no scholar could properly place. When at last we reached the farmstead of Frank Herman, it felt as though we had crossed a threshold in time. A heavy oak gate, gray with age, stood between two towering stone posts, and dry-laid walls stretched away on either side, stonework of a style no mason practiced anymore. The track beyond followed a ridgeline, the farmhouse distant and solitary, fields divided by boundaries far older than any living memory. Frank Herman and his wife, Mabel, greeted us as though we were expected guests rather than strangers. Frank wore a woolen jacket fastened with bone toggles, and his trousers were held by leather braces. Mabel's hair was hidden beneath a straw bonnet, edged in black ribbon. They looked less like farmers of the present age than figures stepped out of an illuminated manuscript. They welcomed us with tea brewed from mountain herbs, and when we were settled, Frank spoke.
I called you here because of something that first happened when I came to this land during the border wars. I had returned, wounded, with a leg replaced by artifice, and thought the quiet would suit me.
He told us how, one afternoon, he had been walking his hounds near the stream at the edge of the forest, a place untouched since the elder days, when he saw a woman standing upon the old ford path. She was small and slender, her garments stirred by the wind, and though he called out to her, she did not respond. The dogs, normally fierce with strangers, remained calm, one even wagging its tail. When Frank drew closer, he stumbled upon a root. By the time he straightened himself, the woman was gone.
She did not flee. She just vanished.
He saw her twice more in the years that followed, once in the yard by moonlight, and once standing silently within his own sitting room. It was then that she spoke, her voice like breath through leaves, and bade him look to the old burial ground at the eastern edge of the farm. At the far eastern edge of the farm, beyond the last grazing field and a stand of twisted hawthorn, the ground dipped into a shallow hollow where the earth remained damp even in high summer. Nettles and briars had claimed most of the space, and only a narrow, half-forgotten path suggested that anyone ever visited the place at all. Frank informed us quietly as he pushed aside a curtain of bramble.
This was once the servants' burial ground. Those who worked the land, but were not of the blood, if you get my drift. No priest came here, no bells were rung.
The graves were simple, low mounds marked by unshaped stones set at the head, some leaning, some half sunk into the soil. Many bore no inscriptions at all. Time and neglect had rendered them anonymous. And then we saw it. Among those humble markers stood a capstone that did not belong amid such humble surroundings. It was larger than any of the others, its pale surface cut from a single slab of fine-grained stone, carefully dressed and polished. Though age had dulled its sheen, the craftsmanship was unmistakable. Intricate carvings traced its edges, interlaced vines, leaves, and flowing lines that hinted at a hand more accustomed to beauty than utility. But the center of the stone was ruined. The name carved there had been struck repeatedly with a hammer or mallet. The blows were not random. They had been delivered with intent, focused on the letters themselves, as though the one who wielded the tool had known exactly what they wished to destroy. Chips and fractures radiated outward from the ruined inscription, marring but not wholly obliterating the design beneath.
This wasn't done by weather, it was done by someone who wanted her gone.
Frank nodded. He produced a folded sheet of heavy parchment from his coat, a charcoal rubbing taken years earlier, before further erosion had softened the edges of the stone. He laid it carefully across a fallen slab so we could see. Even through the smudged black lines and missing fragments, the original intent was clear. The lettering had been elegant, flowing, each character formed with patience and precision. Whoever had commissioned the stone had spared no effort, no expense.
This was no servant's marker.
No, it was placed here to hide her, to bury love alongside her body.
The name itself was nearly impossible to read now. The first portion had been shattered beyond recognition, and the remaining letters were fractured, their meaning obscured. Yet beneath the defacement, there was tenderness, a gentleness in the curve of the script that spoke of grief rather than obligation. From the fragments, Frank had pieced together what he could. It looked like the last part of her name was Marie, and it seemed that she had died at only 22 winters. Below the broken name, a verse had survived, partially shielded by the stone's natural veining, as though chance itself had conspired to preserve it. Frank read aloud, his voice almost reverent.
Thu comest swil Saphir into minimoin horta, and thea we fordfaren, Saphir stent. Ikwart we scale and gemetan beyond an thisnawaga, and off that thona, ikeom fordrit theen.
Translated into English, it read, "You came like flame into my heart, and though we part, the fire remains. I know we shall meet beyond this veil, and until then, I am forever yours." There was a long silence after the words faded. Frank admitted at last, a trace of regret in his tone.
I had the lettering restored as best I could. I hired a mason, one of the few left who still works stone by hand, but even he could not tell what some of the original marks meant. Some letters were guesswork, some numbers didn't align with the older cuts.
He traced a finger just above the ruined name, careful not to touch it.
The spelling is wrong, almost like Old English, and the dates, they don't match. It's as if the stone itself resisted being fully corrected.
Michael looked up at him.
Because whoever destroyed it didn't just want her dead, they wanted her unmade.
Frank met his gaze and nodded. He folded the rubbing carefully, as though handling something sacred.
Yes, because the truth wasn't merely inconvenient. The truth was meant to be forgotten.
A breath of wind passed through the hollow then, stirring the grass and nettles. For just a moment, I thought I caught the faint scent of wildflowers, hawthorn and something sweeter, older, and the unsettling sense that the grave was not empty of memory, nor entirely at rest. Over the days that followed, Frank guided us beyond the boundaries of Castellan, into tracts of land the villagers rarely entered except out of necessity. Each morning began beneath low, drifting cloud, the hills veiled in mist that clung stubbornly to the stone and grass, as though the veil itself were reluctant to reveal what lay beneath. Our first destination lay east of the village, where the land rose unevenly and the turf thinned, exposing pale stone beneath. There, half hidden by bracken and wind-sheared hawthorn, stood the remains of walls so collapsed that at first glance they appeared no more than natural ridges. Only upon closer inspection did their deliberate placement become apparent. The stones were fitted together without mortar, yet held their shape despite centuries of frost and rain. They curved subtly rather than meeting at clean angles, forming arcs and spirals that felt more grown than built. Frank rested a hand against the lichen-covered stone.
These walls were not meant to endure conquest. They were meant to endure time.
Nearby, we traced the faint outline of a road, its surface broken and sunken, swallowed almost entirely by soil and grass. It did not follow the straight, practical lines favored by human engineers, nor did it conform to any known imperial style. Instead, it rose and fell with the land, bending gently to avoid outcroppings rather than cutting through them. In places, fragments of pale stone still showed through, worn smooth as if by centuries of careful passage. Michael knelt to examine one such fragment, brushing away dirt with reverent care.
This was shaped, but not by wheels, too narrow, too light. It was trodden by feet, and not many of them at once.
As we continued, we encountered foundations unlike any we had catalogued before. They formed elongated ovals and interlocking rings, their interiors sunk slightly below ground level. The stones bore faint grooves and markings, eroded almost beyond recognition, yet arranged in patterns that suggested intentional design rather than decoration. Michael observed.
There are no hearths, no smoke vents either. These dwellings were not built around fire.
Or perhaps fire was not their master.
On the third day, Frank took us to the village hall, a low-timbered structure that served as both meeting place and informal repository. From a locked chest beneath the dais, he withdrew several wrapped bundles, each carefully tied with twine, yellowed by age. The first contained coins. They were small, thin, and impossibly precise, their edges sharp and unblemished, despite the centuries they were said to have endured. Each bore a sigil unlike any royal mint, a stylized leaf encircling a star with 7 points, rendered with such fineness that even under magnification, the lines appeared flawless. There was no corrosion, no pitting, no sign of decay.
These were found in different locations, fields, stream beds, even embedded in stone. The scholars dated them to the late Iron Age, yet they show none of the degradation expected of metal from that era.
He then laid out a second collection, coins unmistakably human. They were thicker, crudely struck by comparison, their markings softened by wear and oxidation.
These are from the same period, yet the craftsmanship is markedly inferior.
Michael's expression grew troubled.
It's as if two cultures occupied the same land at the same time, but operated at entirely different levels of refinement.
Or one remembered, perhaps more than the other.
At last, Frank unwrapped the final bundle. The short sword lay upon the table like a sleeping thing. Its blade was narrow and leaf-shaped, tapering to a point so precise it seemed almost unreal. The metal held a soft, silvery sheen, catching the light even in the dim hall, and when I lifted it, the balance was so perfect that it felt less like holding an object and more like aligning with it. There was no rust, no nicks, no sign that time had touched it at all. The hilt was wrapped in dark leather, supple despite its age, and set with a single, pale stone that pulsed faintly, like moonlight caught beneath ice.
This was taken from Elden Hollow.
At the mention of that name, Michael and I stiffened, our eyes wide. My voice was uneasy.
Elden Hollow, but that cave is avoided even now.
As it has been for ages, though it was not always so called. The older name, recorded only once, in a fragment of a monastic ledger, was Elfile, meaning Elven Hollow.
He told us how the blade had been found deep within the cavern system, sealed behind a collapse of stone, so unstable that no further exploration was possible. Alongside it were bodies, many bodies, laid carefully upon stone shelves and within natural alcoves.
They were not thrown there, nor were they hidden. They were placed, arranged, perhaps even honored.
No exact number could be given. The rock stratus shifted constantly, threatening collapse at the slightest disturbance. What little had been recovered suggested that the dead had not perished in battle, nor by disease. Michael responded, a hint of shock in his voice.
That means they were probably sacrificed or entombed for some kind of protection.
We all came to the rather uncomfortable conclusion that it might have been both. On our final excursion, Frank led us to a low rise overlooking the Vale, where only a single wall still stood upright. Its stones were smoother than the rest, their surfaces etched with markings so faint they were nearly invisible in daylight. As the sun lowered, the grooves caught the light, and the inscription revealed itself. Castaure. Michael inhaled sharply.
That is not a human word.
No, it is Elven. Castaure means fortified village in Yaralaman, the ancient tongue.
He gestured toward the surrounding ruins, the broken roads, the hollowed foundations.
Contrary to what our history books have told us, Castellan is not named after a human castle. There was none here when the name first appeared in the records. It derived its name from this place, for a stronghold that stood long before human banners flew in this vale.
The wind passed over the hill then, sighing through the grass and stones, and for a fleeting moment I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched, not with hostility, but with patience, as though something old had been waiting for us to finally understand. Frank paused before continuing, as though weighing how much of the tale should truly be spoken aloud. When he resumed, his voice was lower, carrying the cadence of something repeated often in secret, but never openly acknowledged.
What I am about to tell you was never written down in full, not by clerics, not by scribes, not even by those who lived it. It survived only in broken recollections, whispered among families who learned long ago that some truths were dangerous to keep.
This is the gist of his account. In the late 14th age, the Vale lay under the authority of Sheriff Rupert Mycroft, a man appointed not for wisdom or restraint, but for his unyielding devotion to doctrine. He was a zealot in every sense of the word, one who believed that order could only be maintained through fear, and that anything which lay beyond the Church's understanding must by its very nature be a threat. It was Mycroft who first proclaimed the village of Castaure unclean. According to his decree, the settlement hidden within the eastern forests was said to house plague-ridden outcasts, men and women afflicted by an unnamed sickness that warped the body and corrupted the soul. He claimed that mercy toward them would invite divine punishment upon the entire region. To enforce this fiction, he forbade any approach to the forested lands surrounding Castaure. Guards were posted on the old roads, and warning posts were erected bearing the sheriff's seal. Those who ignored them were not questioned. They were executed. No trials were held. No records kept. The bodies were left where they fell, as a warning to others.
Fear spread faster than any disease ever could.
It was during this time that Magnus Denner settled the land that would later become Frank's farm. He was a practical man, cautious by nature, and keenly aware of the dangers of drawing attention to oneself. His wife, Olwen, was gentler, though no less shaped by the hard realities of the age. Together, they raised their son Bryn with a strict respect for law and tradition, instilling in him a belief that survival depended upon obedience. Yet Bryn was restless. He grew into a young man with a hunter's patience and a dreamer's heart, often venturing farther into the wild than his parents would have approved. The forest called to him, not with menace, but with promise. And it was there, on a day softened by sunlight and birdsong, that his life changed forever. Bryn had followed a deer trail deeper than usual, unaware, or perhaps uncaring, that he had crossed the invisible boundary that marked the edge of forbidden ground. Near a stream, where the trees grew close and ancient roots twisted through stone, he came upon a young woman lying in a patch of sunlight. At first, he thought her dead. She lay perfectly still, her dark auburn hair fanned across the forest floor, her skin pale as polished ivory. When her eyes opened suddenly, bright and green as new leaves, she startled him and herself. She sprang to her feet and ran. Bryn called out instinctively, pleading that he meant no harm, that he had believed her lifeless. Something in his voice made her stop. Slowly, warily, she turned back. Their conversation was brief at first, edged with fear. She warned him that his presence placed them both in danger. He, in turn, spoke of plague and exile, of the lies he had been taught. And then she told him the truth. Her name was Amaree Wynris, daughter of Lord Cyrano Wynris, ruler of the people hidden within Castaure. They were not lepers. They were not cursed. They were the Sidhe. They were elves. Once, long ago, they had lived openly upon the land, sharing valleys and forests with humankind. But as human kingdoms rose and faith hardened into dogma, the elves became inconvenient, living reminders of a world that did not conform to a single doctrine. Rather than acknowledge them, the church chose denial. Instead of negotiation, it chose erasure. And so the elves hid themselves away, cloaking their village in illusion and allowing the lie of disease to stand, for fear was safer than truth. Bryn listened, shaken but enthralled. Everything about Amaree, the clarity of her gaze, the grace of her movements, the strange cadence of her speech, suddenly made sense. She was not merely different. She was older than the world he knew. Their meetings became frequent, always cautious, always hidden. They met by streams, beneath hawthorn boughs, in quiet glades where the forest seemed to lean inward, sheltering them. Bryn learned of Elven customs, of their songs and their reverence for the land. Amaree learned of human life beyond the forest, the fears, the labor, the faith that governed it. Against all reason, affection grew. Against all caution, love took root. What began as hesitant conversation became longing, and longing became devotion. Each parting was harder than the last, each reunion more precious because it might be their final one. Eventually, Bryn could no longer bear the secrecy. On a cool evening near the weir where forest and field met, Bryn knelt before Amaree and offered her a ring he had fashioned himself, thin strands of copper wire plaited together with careful hands. It was crude by Elven standards, lacking gem or enchantment, but it was honest. Amaree wept when she saw it. She accepted, without hesitation. Though wary, her parents agreed to meet Bryn. Lord Cyrano Wynris was a warrior marked by many battles, his body bearing scars earned in ages past. Lady Alora, his wife, carried the quiet dignity of one who had seen centuries unfold. They listened, they questioned, and finally they consented. The elves were fading. Their numbers dwindled with each passing generation, and many bloodlines had already vanished. Union with humans, though dangerous, was sometimes the only means by which their people might endure. They blessed the union, not without fear, but with hope. What none of them knew was that their secrecy had already been compromised. Father Amaree, the local monk, had long suspected Bryn's absences. His own name carried traces of older truths, meaning elf stronghold in Old English, though he would never have admitted it. Whether through instinct or inherited memory, he sensed something heretical unfolding beyond his sight. He sent a man to watch. A loyal servant of Sheriff Mycroft followed Bryn into the woods, unseen and patient. He observed the meetings. He listened. He returned with news. And when Sheriff Rupert Mycroft learned the truth, fear was given purpose. The machinery of persecution began to turn. When Bryn's father finally learned the truth, it was not with sorrow or disbelief, but with terror disguised as fury. Magnus Denner stood in the center of the hall, his hands clenched so tightly that the knuckles shone white, his breath coming in harsh, broken pulls. The fire crackled behind him, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls, and in that wavering light his face seemed unfamiliar to his son, older, harder, and carved with a fear he did not know how to name. Magnus' voice was raw with panic.
You have shamed this house. You have consorted with one of them, one of the cursed creatures from that blighted place. Do you have any notion what you have done?
Bryn tried to speak, but his father would not allow it. He went on, pacing like a trapped animal.
They lie. They always lie. They wear fair faces and speak honeyed words, and then they rot a man's soul from the inside. If the sheriff learns of this, they will burn the forest to ash to cleanse it, and rightly so. Better that than allow such filth to spread.
Bryn answered at last, his voice shaking but unbroken.
But father, I love her, and she is not what you think. She is kind. She is...
Enough. If I ever see her near this house, I will strike her down myself, by my own hand if I must. Do you hear me, boy? Better her blood on the ground than this madness brought upon us all.
He leaned closer, as if threatening.
The guards are already being summoned. They will take you both, and once they have wrung the truth from you, they will see to it that no trace of that village remains. Not a man, not a woman, not even a child.
Magnus did not know that Amaree stood just beyond the door, her hand pressed to the cold timber, her breath shallow and silent. Every word struck her like a blade.
She did not weep.
She did not cry out. She listened. And as she listened, she saw the future with terrible clarity.
Chains. Fire.
Screams echoing through the forest. The palisade torn down. The children hiding beneath their mothers' cloaks as steel and flame found them. Her father dying with a sword in his hand. Her people erased, their songs silenced forever. All because of her. She stepped away from the door without a sound. From within the folds of her cloak, she drew a small glass vial no larger than her finger, stoppered with wax. It had been given to her long ago by one of the elder women of her people, not as a weapon, but as a mercy, a final choice should the world close in and leave no path untouched by blood. When Bryn emerged, his face pale and stricken, he found her standing in the yard beneath the open sky. One look at her eyes told him that she knew everything. He reached for her, but she raised a trembling hand. As she spoke, her voice was steady despite the storm within her.
Meldamin, there are fates worse than death, and there are deaths that spare others from them.
Before he could understand, before he could stop her, she broke the seal and drank. Bryn caught her as the strength fled her limbs, sinking to his knees as he gathered her against him. Her body shuddered, her breath coming in shallow gasps, and he cried out her name again and again, as though sound alone might tether her to the world. Tears streaked his face as he cradled her head, his hands useless, his heart tearing itself apart with every second that passed. With the last of her strength, Amaree lifted her gaze to his. Her eyes, once bright with laughter and forest light, were already clouding, yet her expression held no fear, only sorrow and love beyond measure. She brushed her fingers weakly against his cheek.
Nama Ari, Meldamin, do not grieve too long. The paths of our people lead beyond this world. We will meet again.
Her hand fell limp as the life fled from her. Bryn held her long after her final breath left her, rocking back and forth in the dirt, unwilling to accept the stillness that had claimed her. When at last he rose, carrying her lifeless form in his arms, the night seemed to recoil from him, as though the world itself understood what had been lost. He bore her to the edge of the forest and placed her body lovingly on a bed of moss below a huge oak tree. He went back inside, too infuriated and distraught to even look at his parents, let alone speak to them. They in turn stood with a look of smug self-righteousness, even though they knew what had just transpired. At his father's reluctant agreement, Amaree Wynris was buried before dawn, without song or ceremony, in the forgotten servants' ground at the edge of the farm. There was no marker at first, only earth, hastily turned, and grief too dangerous to display. Soon after that fateful night, Sheriff Mycroft ordered his troops to ransack the village of Castaure, leaving none alive. But when they arrived to carry out their dastardly orders, they found the settlement abandoned, not a trace of its inhabitants. The only thing that seemed out of place was a massive stone circle, like an archaic pagan moongate, just outside the village walls. The trackers noted that it appeared that hundreds of feet, of various sizes, had made their way toward the circle, but did not continue on the other side. Years after, when Bryn inherited his father's farm, a stone was finally set, and Amaree's name was carefully carved by a loving hand, with a touching epitaph that spoke of undying devotion. And later still, it was defaced by members of the church who considered such honor to be blasphemous. Those who feared the truth struck the letters until they were unreadable, as if by breaking the stone they could unmake the love it marked. Frank concluded the tale.
But the land remembered, and so did she.
He drew a long breath before offering his theory, as though even naming it carried weight. He said that, after years of study, of listening to old stories and watching the patterns of what occurred upon the land, he had come to believe the spirit seen wandering his fields was Amaree's. Not a specter bound by rage or vengeance, not a thing of hunger or unrest, but something quieter and far more enduring.
She isn't tethered to the earth by hatred, nor by unfinished business, the way people like to imagine. She is held here by love, by memory.
He explained that the sightings followed no random cycle. They occurred only at certain moments, when plows cut too deeply into untouched soil, when old stones were shifted or removed, when construction threatened to erase what little remained of the past. Each appearance coincided with an act of forgetting, or worse, deliberate denial.
She appears when the land is disturbed, and when the dead are neglected, when their names are lost. When history is pressed flat beneath convenience, she is seen then as well.
She was not there to frighten, but to remind. Farmhands spoke of a pale figure standing at dusk at the edge of a field, near the old oak tree where Bryn had first taken her after her passing, watching in silence. Others reported the scent of flowers where none had grown for generations, or the sudden stillness of birdsong, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Machinery would fail without explanation. Tools would go missing, only to be found laid carefully atop ancient stones, as though placed by a deliberate hand. Frank's voice was firm.
She doesn't harm anyone, but she will not allow the land to be stripped of its memory. Not again.
He believed Amaree lingered because she had been denied what even the dead deserved: recognition, truth, and peace. Her grave defaced, her story silenced, her people erased from the records of the world. Yet rather than curdle into bitterness, her presence had become something else entirely. A guardian, a witness.
She remembers what others were told to forget, and she asks only that we do the same.
As his words settled into the quiet of the room, the air shifted. A breeze moved through the hall, though no door stood open, lifting loose papers and stirring the edge of the curtain. The lamps flickered, their flames bending briefly toward the east, as if drawn by something unseen. For a heartbeat, no longer than a breath, I thought I heard a woman's voice carried upon the moving air. It was soft, threaded with sorrow, yet unmistakably gentle. There was no anger in it, no threat, only longing and remembrance. Then the breeze passed, the room stilled, and the silence that followed felt less empty than before, as though something had listened, and having been heard at last, had withdrawn once more into the patient keeping of the land.
Thank you. Remember. Respect.
If you enjoyed this tale, please give us a like, a comment, and subscribe. It would mean the world to us.